Well, I know there's been a lot of speculation on social media and elsewhere as to the reasons the president signed the proclamation, but it really comes down to the fact that Sierra Leone is the 13th highest overstay rate for B1, B2 tourist and business travelers in the globe, and the 8th highest overstay rate for students and exchange visitors in the world. And because of those very high overstay rates that we've talked about before, that I've talked about with others in the media before, the president did not feel that he could continue in good faith to allow Sierra Leoneans to receive B1, B2 tourist and business and exchange visitor and student visas, and decided to impose restrictions upon those categories as well as upon a wide number of categories on the immigrant visa side.
All right, all right. So as you can see, the U.S. ambassador to Sierra Leone has been interviewed and has spoken out. We are going to react today to what he said and what the restrictions are to Sierra Leoneans. We heard directly from the person who's responsible for implementing policy as it pertains to the United States and Sierra Leone in Sierra Leone. And so we're going to talk about that and many more things as this live stream goes on. I am your Joe Hatagwa from Authentic African. Each week we go live with Sierra Leoneans killing it to talk about things happening in Sierra Leone and in the diaspora. It's your weekly dive into the issues, news, and the people shaping Sierra Leone and the diaspora. So each week you can join us as we engage with professionals, journalists, various guests, and sometimes it'll be myself and Admire where we propel the country forward. We'll have in-depth conversations and discussions, enlightening issues that matter most. So make sure you stay a part of this live stream weekly so you can hear about the news happening in Sierra Leone. Now, have any of you guys seen the ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to Sierra Leone on AYV talking about this? I want to hear from you guys if you heard about this. So you saw that he recited a few specific details, right? Before we get into some of the rest of the videos and I get a chance to kind of react to each one of these clips from the interview, I want to give you kind of a high level overview of what Bryan Hunt outlined as part of the visa restrictions when he was on AYV a day after we went live to talk about this in Sierra Leone. Just to be clear, can you guys hear me and can you see me on all platforms? Let me know if you guys can hear me and if you guys can see me on all platforms. We should be live on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok. As of right now, Admire will be joining us in just a moment, but I got started. She'll be here shortly, but I just got started so that we can kick this thing off. She is in the middle of doing something, but she will be back. She will be with us shortly. But can you guys hear me? Give me a thumbs up. Let me know that you guys can hear me and where you're watching from so I know that this is coming through clearly. And can you see me too? Okay, so it looks like BRAYANH says yes, you can hear me and you can see me. Cool, cool, cool. African Echo join. Shout out to you guys. I love what you guys are doing on Instagram. All right, cool. So let's get into it. So the background and the restrictions. So the U.S. ambassador to Sierra Leone, Bryan David Hunt, he appeared on AYV. Now, AYV is also called Africa's Young Voices. It is the Gen Z millennial news television station in Sierra Leone. I've known a number of people who've worked for them. I've done some content and talked about working with them. Anybody you know who does anything on camera in Sierra Leone has either at one point in time worked with AYV or is currently doing work with AYV. They're at all the events and they try their best to be the premier news outlet of Sierra Leone. So anyway, they sat down with Bryan Hunt and on the 4th of talking about what happened on the 4th of July, which was the imposed visa restrictions on Sierra Leonean nationals that was imposed on the 4th of June. So the restrictions have generated obviously significant concern among Sierra Leoneans, particularly those participating with the U.S. diversity visas or DV lottery and those seeking tourist visas, students, and exchange visas. Now, the points that he cited and some of the details, he had some very specific numbers that he mentioned. And I wanted to see if I could find those numbers here because I don't have them off memory. But what he said was Sierra Leone is the, what was it? We have like top 20 in terms of the percentage of our folks who overstay, according to him. Now, that is not in terms of the number of people, it's just a percentage of those who apply and overstay. So, for example, there are people with much larger numbers of people who are overstaying in the United States, but we have a higher percentage, according to him, of people who overstay out of the people who are granted visas. So, again, just to go through, okay, so this is what he said. He said, the reasons for the visa restrictions. He explained that in his estimation, the main reason for the new restrictions is Sierra Leone's high rate of visa overstays in the United States. Specifically, he said Sierra Leone ranks as the 13th highest country with B1, B2, which is the tourist and business visas, overstays. And he says that we are the 8th highest for student and exchange visitor visa overstays globally. Because of these high overstay rates, the U.S. government determined it could not, in good faith, continue issuing these visa categories to Sierra Leoneans and therefore imposed new restrictions. I think you guys might remember, too, when we went live last week, we talked about what percentage of those people also overstay as well. So we talked about the ranking, he said, right? 13th and 8th. And then the percentage was, if I'm not mistaken, 35% of student visas overstay. And it was something like 14% of the other visas overstay. And so with those percentages being as high as they say it is, they determined our ranking amongst countries in the world is part of the highest. And so for that reason, they decided to no longer issue visas. Now, some of the other things that were detailed, and we'll get to some of these in a second, is the non-immigrant visas, right? The U.S. Embassy of Sierra Leone will no longer offer those B1, B2 visas, as I mentioned, where they said we're the 13th highest. Immigrant visas, issuance of immigrant visas is now primarily restricted to immediate relatives of U.S. citizens or permanent residents. So if you're a permanent resident green card holder, right, or if you're a U.S. citizen, I say permanent resident. If you're a permanent resident and a U.S. citizen, you can get an immigrant visa for immediate relatives. That usually means spouse, if I'm not mistaken. That means children, parents, and I think siblings. Those who have already valid visas may still travel, but new visa issuance is paused on the diversity visa. And that's the 2026 diversity visa lottery winners from Sierra Leone will not be able to receive their visas during this restriction period. The restriction period is a period of 90 days, according to the ambassador. So that is 90 days from the proclamation on June 5th. Yeah, I know. So those people who are meant to receive the DV visas, which a lot of people pray for in Sierra Leone, if they have been granted the DV visa and they were a winner, unfortunately, they will not be able to receive the visas during this 90-day period. If it extends beyond the 90 days, then their eligibility may still expire. So winners who have not yet received their visas are unlikely to get them before the eligibility expires on September 30th, 2025, even if the restrictions are lifted after 90 days. So some clarifications that he made during this interview. He said that there's no blanket ban. There's no blanket ban. So Ambassador Hunt emphasized that there is no blanket visa ban or travel ban for Sierra Leoneans. He said the restrictions are targeted and primarily affect non-immigrant and most immigrant visa categories, with exceptions for immediate family members. No import interventions. According to him, the U.S. Embassy has not sent officials to the airport to stop travelers. He says that any communication regarding travel restrictions would come from U.S. Customs and Border Protection to airlines, not from the embassy. U.S. visa application fees. Application fees are not refunded, as they cover the cost of quote-unquote processing, not visa issuance. So this is a standard practice, of course, even when applications are refused for other reasons. So as usual, so much money is lost to Sierra Leoneans every year for quote unquote processing visas, right? And do not get that money back if you do not get that visa. Future outlook. The restrictions are subject to review after 90 days. If the Sierra Leonean government, quote, and the U.S. government reach new agreements on cooperation and overstay rates, quote unquote, decrease, visa insurance may resume in the affected categories. The specific quote he said is, "We are trying a new strategy, we're retooling, and we hope at some point, assuming we're able to come to an agreement with the Sierra Leonean government on new forms of cooperation, we'll be able to resume visa issuance in those categories." That is a direct quote from Ambassador Bryan Hunt. So let me put up on my screen really quickly, for those who are watching on everything but TikTok. We will get you guys a little bit of a view, and then we'll get into the next couple of videos so we can respond to them directly. So let me see here. All right. Give me a second. Let me just pull it up on the screen. I'm doing this impromptu. I wasn't planning to share this particular piece, but I think it was important to share it. So this gives you kind of an outlook of how it's structured and set up. Okay, so I'm not sure if you can see this, but this says visa category in the left category, and on the right it says status for Sierra Leoneans as of June 2025. So just so you can see all the visa restrictions and where they are. So the B1, B2, which are the tourist and business visas, they are not issued, and there's a 90-day pause. They will not be issued, and there's a 90-day pause. Student and the exchange visitor visas. So if you're in an exchange program or if you're a student, not issued. It will not be issued. Immigrant visas, IRI 5 only, which means immediate relatives of U.S. citizens. Those immigrant visas will still be issued. The DV lottery diversity visa is not issued during the restriction period. However, the diversity visa expires September of 2025, and it doesn't look like the visas will be issued before, even if the 90-day pause is lifted. And then other immigrant visas beyond the IRI, so the IR-15, sorry, are all not issued. So I just wanted to give you guys that heads up and give you guys that understanding of how this is going to work. Unfortunately, those visas will no longer be issued. Many visas will no longer be issued. And unfortunately, as I told you, I had spoken to someone with intimate knowledge of the situation that works at the American Embassy in Sierra Leone. They got a call, and they got notified early in the morning, Friday morning. Was it last week or the week before? My weeks are, well, whatever it was June 5th. They got that early morning notification. It was a holiday in Sierra Leone. The embassy had to open for people to come in, and they basically were on the phone all morning calling people saying, if your visa is ready, we have to issue it to you today. You need to come to the embassy today before we close. I think they close at 4 or 5, maybe even 3. I can't even remember what time they close, but they close between 3 and 5 p.m. And they told people that day they had to come get their visas. Monday was going to be too late for them to get their visas. So imagine you're going through the process, you paid for it, you find out you're approved, but you are too far away to be able to come to the embassy and pick it up. And by the way, they don't let proxies pick up your visa for you. You have to pick up your visa yourself. You have to go through a screening process through the embassy. There's a process, metal detectors. You have to leave stuff with them. You can't even take your phone inside the building. It all gets left at the door. And at the little security area, and then you go in, maybe with an ID or something of that sort to identify yourself so that you can be issued your visa. That is the only way your visa gets issued to you. And if you were not there on that Friday, visas were not issued to those people. Tiggy says that's terrible. Yes, it is. It's really unfortunate. But again, as I said last week, the thing is, there are going to be many, many policies that we are not going to agree with when it as it pertains to countries that Sierra Leone is dealing with. People are looking to get visas to go to. However, I think that there is some validity in the sense to say that you can't give them a reason to have these kind of policies that you don't agree with. And if it is true, and there's some disputes and debates around how much of what has been said by the U.S. Embassy in Sierra Leone versus what people on the ground have said. But if we have a 35% overstay rate for student visas, 14% overstay rate for business and travel visas, if we're 13th in terms of the number of overstays that we have out of all countries in the world, and we're number 9th in another visa, then it's kind of giving them a reason to say this is why we're not offering visas. You don't see Sierra Leoneans out marching in the streets about this. And you know why? Because if you think about it, you may understand why they're doing that. Now, there are other things that we could argue about, and the conditions in which people are living in, and why they overstay, and why they want to leave at a 75% rate. I think I read this to you guys a few months ago. There was a survey. They talked about people wanting to leave Sierra Leone. And it was something like 75% of the people who took that survey said they wanted to leave Sierra Leone and never come back. And that's an unfortunate place for people to be in, and that's how they feel. And then you have folks like myself and others who are trying to get folks to come back to Sierra Leone because there's so much opportunity and there's so much we can do to help advance our country. And I think with more of us doing that, I think you'll have less people wanting to leave and wishing that one day they can go to the United States. I remember when I first came to Sierra Leone, I remember the first time I came to Sierra Leone, and I was talking to a family member of mine, and we were talking about, me growing up in the States and how I wasn't even aware of the privilege I had being an American citizen and born as an American. Even though I love Sierra Leone and Ghana, and I spend a lot of time in West Africa, there are privileges to having a blue passport. We just have to be honest with that, in terms of traveling around the world and many other things. And I remember talking to a cousin of mine who said, one day I will go to America, God willing. And I remember thinking to myself, man, like this is like a dream for him. And that's the first time conceptually I had heard from someone specifically state that one of their life goals is just to be able to get to America. And that kind of stuck with me. And so, everything I do now is about wanting people to not feel like they have to come to America to be able to live a fulfilled life. That especially, specifically with people on the continent of Africa. And that's the focus, right? With everything we're doing is to get people to feel like they're living not the American dream, but they're living the African dream, their own personal dream, right? And that can be done on the continent. That's the goal. Tim Black says, hit the like button, everybody. All right. So let's get to the specifics. So we talked about some of the restrictions already. Let's talk to some of the other numbers that he calls out in this particular interview. So let's listen to what he says about where other people rank in West Africa.
What I can say, and I brought the CBP statistics with me because I don't memorize every country. So Sierra Leone's overstay rate is above 15% for B1, B2. Ghana's overstay rate is 7.5%. Nigeria's overstay rate is 7.14%. So we're gravely concerned when any country hits above 10%. And when you hit 15% and are the 13th highest in the globe on misuse for business and tourist visas, that attracts the attention of the administration, and the president has to react. So
again, just to listen to those numbers again.
What I can say, and I brought the CBP statistics with me because I don't memorize every country.
Okay.
Sierra Leone's overstay rate is above 15% for B1.
So it's 15% and 7 versus Ghana and Nigeria. Now, granted, Sierra Leone is a country with 7 to 9 million people. Ghana has 25 to 30 million people. Some people say 35 million people. And Nigeria has 220 plus million people. So 7% of 220 million is much higher than 15% of 7 million. Now, obviously, not all 7, it's not 15% of 7 million, but it's the number of people who are granted visas out of the population of 7 million, right? So now, I don't know how many people are granted visas from Sierra Leone versus Nigeria, but you would imagine the number is much higher in Nigeria because many more applicants are going to apply. And so any small percentage of that number is going to be a higher number. But we do have double the percentage of those who apply for visas and are granted visas that are overstaying versus our neighbors. That was a question that somebody had asked on the live stream last week when we talked about it. And that's the ambassador's answer to that. Ghana is about 7 point something percent. Nigeria is about 7 point something percent. He said Sierra Leone is 15%. So he says over 10% causes concern, over 15% puts you in the banned categories, right? So according to them, that's their reasons. That's their logic. They have specific numbers to back it up. And it is a rare occurrence where they have specific numbers to back up their policies and their belief systems and why they do things the way they do them. And in this case, they made it very clear. It is because we, as a Sierra Leonean, as a nation of Sierra Leone, we are much higher than our neighbors, or at least other folks in West Africa. Now, what he didn't mention was any other folks in West Africa whose names, that didn't come up. He didn't mention other countries either outside of West Africa. So we don't know where we stand with everyone. But of course, obviously, if we're 13th, that means there's out of 206, I think it is, or 196. I don't know what the number is of recognized countries around the world. There's always some number of countries that are recognized by some regional blocks, not recognized by the United Nations. But in general, it's right around 200 countries that are generally recognized widely. And if we rank 13th worst for overstays in a particular visa category, that is why we have been called out as a nation. So some people ask the question, is it because he's trying to punish Sierra Leone? Has Sierra Leone not cooperated? Has Sierra Leone done something that pissed off the president of the United States? I'm not sure Sierra Leone really is a country that he's focused too much on, to be honest. I think his administration is just calling out anybody over a certain percentage. Probably he wanted to decide to do something with that. I'm just going to be honest with you. If he didn't know, anything about the Congo, then I can't imagine how much he would know about Sierra Leone. All right. So let me see what other videos. There's a couple of clips from this interview that I wanted to review and kind of talk through, because I do think it's important to hear from the people who are imposing the restrictions, their reasons for imposing the restrictions, right? So let me get to the next video I had in here. I think this was the overstays, what the consequences are. So let's see what he has to say.
So we'll see how the process ultimately evolves, but I think it's much too early for anyone to be writing off the MCC compact.
Overstay in the U.S., is it the method that the people who overstay use that is the issue, or it's the overstay itself?
It's the overstay itself that we're concerned with. The fact that someone has chosen to violate our laws and remain beyond their legal period of admission is in and of itself a concern to the United States.
How do we juxtapose that with even the U.S., for example, people from the U.S. who come to Sierra Leone on official visits, and at some point they fall in love with Sierra Leone and decide to make Sierra Leone home? We have seen those people.
And what she's saying is those people stay and overstay. So I think he did have a response to that, but just to call that out, I mean, that is true, right? Now there's an outsized relationship, right, between the United States and Sierra Leone. Two very different countries on the world stage and how they're approached and perceived. And so, obviously there are Americans that overstay in Sierra Leone, and Sierra Leone, although it's not, it's not officially a welcome thing. They don't really enforce it the way, the United States enforces the removal of people who overstay, right? You don't see the same kind of vigor taken against Americans who overstay or other countries' nationals who overstay in Sierra Leone, the way the United States approaches it. I just think it's interesting. Let's get to the next video.
Make your home.
Well, I hope that those who fall in love with Sierra Leone, at least from the United States side, don't simply stay. I hope they comply with your immigration laws, do what is necessary to legally adjust their status, and remain in a legal status in Sierra Leone. That's all we ask of Sierra Leoneans going to the United States. If you choose to enter the United States and then subsequently decide you want to stay, you marry an American citizen, you take a job with a U.S. company, as long as you adhere to the process to adjust your status from that of a non-immigrant to a different category, that's fine. We have legal pathways that people can use to do that. And what we ask is that people use those legal pathways if they wish to remain.
So that was a response to the earlier video, right? What about other people who overstay? His opinion is like, well, there are paths to citizenship, so follow those paths. Let's hear what he had to say next.
Restriction is on Sierra Leonean nationals.
The restrictions, are they for Sierra Leoneans or for Sierra Leone? I asked because you would find that there are Sierra Leoneans who also apply for U.S. visas through other U.S. embassies in other countries.
So it applies to Sierra Leonean nationals, so those who carry a Sierra Leonean passport and are applying for a visa on that passport, regardless of where you apply. The restriction is on Sierra Leonean nationals. For Sierra Leonean nationals who have two passports, so you have nationality of both Sierra Leone and, say, the United Kingdom, you are still free to travel on your United Kingdom passport. So it is only for those who are traveling on their Sierra Leonean passport that the restriction would apply.
So you got that, right? So if you guys are dual citizens between Sierra Leone and, let's say, another country that's not banned. So there are people who are dual citizens between Sierra Leone and Ghana, for example. You can apply for a visa with your Ghanaian passport to the United States without those same restrictions. You would just not apply for your visa with your Sierra Leonean passport to the United States. I would imagine what we're going to see is more dual citizens of Sierra Leoneans and people in other countries. You find that a ton with Nigerians who their passport is difficult to get into many other countries, like even in parts of East Africa, etc., and North Africa. You see that they get citizenship elsewhere. A ton of times they try to work on getting citizenship in other countries so that they can use that country's passport to apply for visas and in other countries.
Restriction is on.
Okay, so let's see. What else do we have?
Flying on social media that the U.S. Embassy had sent correspondence to the airport stopping people with particular kinds of visas.
No, that is not. That is categorically untrue. First, the embassy would never do that. That's not our role. Any communication to transportation carriers, airlines, would come from the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Service directly to those carriers. So no, we have not said anything like that. And as I said, the guidance is that those who have visas are able to travel to a U.S. port of entry in order to apply to enter the United States, same as they always were.
Yeah, so some points were made there. So Pro Woman says, this as he wears African mudcloth print, I roll. Yeah, I mean, look, yeah, it is challenging to watch this and to hear the restrictions. But, you know, like I said, our goal here is for people not to wish and pray that they can one day eventually get to America. Our goal here is to have a better life for them in Sierra Leone so they don't have to want to go to America, or so that less people overstay their visas in America and actually come back. You know, there are countries like China, you know, the Philippines, mostly like I'll say mostly China, a little bit of India, and you see this in other African nations, by the way, and especially in the Middle East, where you have people who go to America for the prestigious universities that America is known for, very expensive, prestigious universities. They go to these universities and go back to their country of origin and build something amazing. And they don't actually stay in America. They stay back home. A mentor of mine is a perfect example of this. Herman Chenry Hesse was someone who was when it wasn't seen as a bad thing, he was called the Bill Gates of Africa, because he was a person who built an IT company, SoftTribe, and it was a remarkable company, and it's still in existence today. And so he built this company after going to high school in Sierra Leone, going to college in the United States, and moved back to Ghana to build this business and start this company. And you think about Jack Ma, who, went to college in America, was working in America, went back to China and started Alibaba, AliExpress, Alipay, incredible giant company. There's many stories like that. We don't have enough stories like that from Sierra Leone. And that is the goal, right? That's the advice I give people now. Go to the US, go to college. If you really want to go to the US for an education, go to college in the US if you can afford to pay for it, and then move back home and start something new while you still have energy, while you still have a network, while you can build something with bringing that diversity of thought based on what you've experienced outside of the country. All right, what else do we got? There was another question.
The fate of those who currently hold a visa, those who had their visas before the pronouncement.
So the president was very clear in the proclamation that we are not revoking current visas. So if you had a valid visa that was issued prior to the proclamation going into effect at midnight Eastern Standard Time today, then you are still able to travel to a U.S. port of entry using that visa like you were before, to apply for entry to the United States through a Customs and Border Protection officer. Now, it has always been the case before the proclamation, and will always be the case after the proclamation, that at the end of the day, the interviewing officer has to be convinced that you are arriving for a legitimate purpose consistent with your visa. And they make the final decision, as they always have, on admission. But you are, if you had a visa, still free to travel to the port of entry to seek that admission.
So that's an important note, right? If you already have a visa, your visa is not going to be revoked. Now, will it be renewed? It's another question. So now this brings to a point, because you mentioned the immigration officer who you interview with. I've heard this anecdotally, and then I listened to someone who's worked at an American embassy on the continent of Africa. And what you find is the immigration officer is not even going to always look at your documentation. They're listening to your answers to the questions. Now, that is as far as I understand the process to be. I can't tell you what to say. I can't tell you how to say it. I don't know if anybody who's ever going to work at an embassy will ever tell anybody that, because, the embassy doesn't want people to game the system. But what I do understand and what I do know is this. They don't always have time to look at all the documentation that you put in place. If you got $50,000 in the bank account and things like that, they're listening to your questions when you talk to them when you're standing up in front of everybody and you're talking through the glass. The questions that they ask you and how you answer those questions is how they are determining whether or not they think you are a high likelihood to overstay a visa and whether or not they're going to issue you that visa. Catherine Smith says, as a pastor and college professor in Houston, I've worked with foreign exchange students from West Africa. When it's time for them to return back to the West African country, they begin crying. Yeah, I mean, so, that what she's saying is I think back to that sentiment of people not wanting to go back home, right? And wanting to stay in the United States, But I think we need to make a better environment for our people back home so that they don't feel like they have to come to America, because, not everybody who comes to America thrives in America. I know some people who aren't doing so well who came to America and they've been in America for 40 plus years. What you find is that so many people now are retiring back to Sierra Leone and wishing they had started the process of building something and starting something in Sierra Leone while they were in the US. Because what ends up happening is you rush to get to the US, you get excited, you get to the US. As you move up the socioeconomic ladder, depending on how far you climb, in many cases, you are required to send money back home for family members. And what that does is it slows down a lot of folks from being able to build the dream that they wanted to build. And generally what happens is they get closer to retirement age and they start focusing on, how am I going to build my retirement home where I'm going to be able to have a driver, I'll have a chef, I'll have somebody to clean my place. I'll have all of the amenities and the services that I wish I had in the United States, but just can't afford. But by the time they're ready to do that, they're too old to start a business, too tired to, go into entrepreneurship. And so all they do is work tirelessly and hopefully, over the last few years before they move, to build a house and then move back to that house, right? So Marissa says some friends from Haiti have been notified that they must return home. Is Mexico a good option? I hear good things about Mexico for some people. And I think it depends on what city and what part of Mexico you're in. Mexico's a large country. And so there are certain areas and certain cities in Mexico that people do recommend you visit or move to. If you have to leave the United States. Okay. What else do we have? Is there another video that I wanted to play? Let's see. I played those videos. Okay, here's one. Here's another one.
What criminalizes them?
So under U.S. law, if you are not in a legal status, a legal visa status, you have committed what we call a civil violation under U.S. law, meaning that you can be fined and you can be removed from the United States.
What does this mean? How does it look like an illegal visa status?
So I go to the United States on my B1, B2 visa.
Okay.
When I arrive at the border, they stamp me in. That stamp says you can remain for 90 days.
Oh.
I choose to stay for 120 days because, for whatever reason, I decide I'm going to ignore the 90-day and stay for 120. On day 91, you are out of status. You have committed a civil violation in the United States, and you are subject to both fines and removal from our country.
The U.S.
You're subject to both fines and removal from the United States. So 90-day visa issued, you stay 91 days, subject to fines. Now, Kabi Lame, who I mentioned before, overstayed his visa, probably because he wanted to go to the Met Gala. I'm not sure. But sometimes these visas are only issued for a 90-day period. You only have 90 days in the country. It's 3 months. And so if you overstay by 1 day, you are subject to fines and removal, right? Which is where you see these ICE raids happening. Ricky Ward says, are you streaming on YouTube as well? I am streaming on YouTube as well. We're streaming on Sierra Leoneans Killing It YouTube channel, and we're streaming on Authentic Africans YouTube channel. All right. And then the final video is about athletes and World Cup travel. Let's listen to what he has to say about that.
Approaching the World Cup.
Yes.
It's a huge global event.
Yes.
A lot of people will be, well, disenfranchised, if you like, from Sierra Leone to attend these things. Do you think that is a problem already? Or will it be a problem?
Yeah, so for those who are traveling to compete in the World Cup, the president has given a waiver so that those who are traveling to compete can still continue to do so, even if they are from one of the countries. For spectators, I'm afraid that if they don't currently hold a B1, B2 visa, they will not be able to travel to the United States at this time.
So you guys heard that I think is the World Cup going to be in the US this coming year? So what they're saying is for those traveling to go to the World Cup, only the athletes and I guess the coaches, I would imagine specific staff of the country's team are granted a temporary visa for that particular use case. And then beyond that, No spectators who doesn't already have a visa can come to the U.S. to watch the World Cup and support Sierra Leone because they're not granting visitor visas anymore, at least for the next 90 days. Well, 90 days after June 5th. So I don't know what date that is, but that's where it was scheduled for. We will keep you posted if any of that changes in any way. As of right now, that's what we understand the situation to be. A Free says, I saw some African countries being banned are under scrutiny right now. Even Ghana is on there. That's stupid. What about all the African American people in Ghana? I don't think Ghana's on the restrictions or travel ban list in any way. Now they may be under. There's maybe scrutiny. I don't know if what you mean by scrutiny, except for the fact that there may be like a travel advisory warning. You know, sometimes the Department of Homeland Security does these travel advisory warnings for specific countries. That is a different thing than visa restrictions from people from those countries to get visas for the United States. But yeah, I'm not sure if Ghana's on the travel advisory warning list, but it has been before. I mean, it's been on the list a couple times when I was, traveling to Ghana in the early days of me moving there and kind of flying back and forth. I did see that it was on, the travel advisory list, same as Sierra Leone. But that is a little different from the visa restrictions, right? We're talking more specifically to, you know, travel advisory warnings for many different reasons. Monkeypox for Sierra Leone. At one point in time, it was, COVID for Ghana. It's just, they issue those things sometimes. I'm trying to think if there was anything else we wanted to review and cover. We've been on for 42 minutes. You guys have been engaged, so I appreciate you guys jumping in, answering some questions, asking some questions. Catherine Smith says, you're exactly right, Joe. The foreign exchange students have to send money back home, even as they're here in the U.S. for only 1 year or two. It becomes really hard for them to live here in the United States. Yeah, in America. That is true. That is true. And for those of you who know anybody who is a part of these protests, what I recommend, and I saw this on a podcast, if you know anybody who's protesting the ice raids. I heard this on a podcast, saw this on a podcast, and I thought I would share it here in case this audience didn't hear it. Recommended people that you know, if they're joining those protests, to come out with American flags, right? I don't think it serves the best interests of those who are trying to make a statement to come out with a flag of another country that they're already trying to send you back to. It just further proves their point in their mind that that's where and that's where you belong anyway. So just keep that in mind, right? If you guys know anybody who's, and I'm not talking about the what was this Victory Day parade or whatever it was yesterday. I'm speaking more to the protests, not the protests for the Victory Day parade. I mean the protests for the ICE raids, those protests. If you know anybody planning to participate in those, I would definitely recommend that they don't cover their face, right? And that they have American flags, right? Don't give them a reason to feel like they need to, shoot at people with rubber bullets, tear gas them, et cetera, et cetera. Pro Woman asked an interesting question. Joe, have you ever sent money back to family in Salon? All the time. All the time. Sometimes on behalf of other people, sometimes myself, especially if somebody passes away or somebody needs a phone or school fees or someone's sick. Yeah, for sure. For sure. I've done it on behalf of other people. I've done it myself. A Free says the countries that could face a full or partial ban if they do not address these concerns within the next 60 days are Angola, Antigua, and a bunch of countries. This is from Reuters. Let me see. Okay. So Reuters, country visa ban. Because well, I think it's Nigeria, Niger, Uganda, Zambia. I didn't see this list. Let's see. Okay, Trump administration. Okay, 2 hours ago. Good call. Thank you for that, A Free. Good call. Good call. So, A Free put us on to something here. So let's share it. Real quickly before we go. This is good. This is, I appreciate you guys jumping in here and offering, new insights. So reported just 2 hours ago. I didn't see it because, I was in the middle of something else. But let's present this screen. I want to show you this article. Okay, Trump administration weighing adding 36 more countries to travel ban. That's a memo, just like the previous memo that went out previously. There's a new memo. Washington, June 15th. U.S. President Donald Trump's administration is considering significantly expanding its travel restrictions by potentially banning citizens of 36 additional countries from entering the United States, according to the internal State Department cable that has been seen by Reuters. As you guys know, earlier this month, the Republican president signed a proclamation that banned the entry of citizens from 12 countries, then, of course, also restricted many more, including Sierra Leone, saying that the move was needed to protect the United States against foreign terrorists and other national security threats. The directive was part of an immigration crackdown Trump launched this year to start his second term, which has included the deportation to El Salvador of hundreds of Venezuelans suspected of being gang members, as well as efforts to deny enrollments of some foreign students from U.S. universities and deport others. The internal diplomatic cable signed by U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the State Department outlined a dozen concerns about countries in question and sought corrective action. So the department, this is what we put up on the screen. The department has identified 36 countries of concern that might be recommended for full or partial suspension of entry if they do not meet established benchmarks and requirements within 60 days. The cable was sent out over the weekend. And so the cable was first reported by the Washington Post. Among the concerns the State Department raised was the lack of quote unquote competent or cooperative government by some of the countries mentioned to produce reliable identity documents, the cable said. Another was quote unquote questionable security of the country's passport. Some countries, the cable said, were not cooperative in facilitating the removal of its nationals from the United States who ordered to be removed. Some countries were overstaying. Some countries were overstaying. Some countries were overstaying their U.S. visas. Their citizens were being granted. I'm not sure I understand that statement. Other reasons for concern were the nationals of the country were involved in acts of terrorism, according to the United States, in the United States, or what they're saying is anti-Semitic or quote unquote anti-American activity. The cable noted that not all of these concerns pertain to every country listed. We are constantly reevaluating policies to ensure the safety of Americans and that foreign nationals follow our laws. That's what a senior State Department official said, declining to comment on the specific internal deliberations and communications. The Department of State is committed to protecting our nation and its citizens by upholding the highest standards of national security and public safety through our visa process. That's what the same official said. So the countries that could face a full and partial ban if they do not address the concerns within the next 60 days are that list that we had up on the screen. So it's these countries here: Angola to Cape Verde. Then you have this other list of groups, Ethiopia through Zimbabwe here. So you got the full list. Tiggy says, wow. A-Free says, he just tried to keep black people away. Tiggy says, oh, sure, making, okay, I'll leave that there. You guys read what was on the screen. So the entry of people from 7 other countries, Burundi, Cuba, Laos, Sierra Leone, Togo, Turkmenistan, and Venezuela, were part of this, the original restrictions list that we mentioned before. So I'm glad that A-Free brought that up. Was it A-Free? Yeah, thank you for that. That was helpful, and I'm glad we were able to get that on camera and on the live stream so we could talk to people, because that is just breaking news literally 2 hours ago. All right, guys. Any other thoughts, questions about this particular topic? If you don't, stay tuned tomorrow. I'll be live for my weekly Pan-African Perspectives live stream. I will also be live again on Thursday for This Week in Africa. We are finally back after a 2-week hiatus. I was traveling for the last 2 weeks. It was very to go live. So we are back, and we will be live this Thursday for This Week in Africa. We'll be live tomorrow for Pan-African Perspectives. So tune in and pay attention. We got more to talk about. All right. With that, guys, I want to say thank you for watching. I will see you all on the next live stream.